So how's everything over there?
It is good. Staying busy.
So first of all, I know you've been to Taiwan before, but still, can you introduce yourself for the coaches or therapists here?
Absolutely. So my name is Dr. Splichal. I go by Dr. Emily. I am a foot specialist in the US. I am also a human movement specialist. I do see patients virtually and in person, but in addition, I am an educator. I'm the founder of EBFA Global, which is an education company. And yes, I've been to Taiwan about 4 or 5 times teaching our courses. And then I'm also the founder of Naboso, which is a sensory product line to help people strengthen and connect to their feet and their nervous system, and how that translates to movement and performance, because we're obviously talking about athletes. So performance and injury prevention is huge.
Cool. So first of all, like I know you talk a lot about barefoot training. So why should athletes train barefoot?
So I look at the foot as a very powerful access point into the nervous system. And the more that we can feel our feet or feel the ground, the faster and more accurate the athlete can be. And everything is about timing of stabilization, reaction time, perception time. So I like to use the foot's perception or accessibility to the ground by being barefoot, getting the shoes off, getting the socks off, so that the athlete can really feel and articulate with the ground. Now, that's one reason. Second reason is that your feet are actually deeply connected to your core and how you stabilize and manipulate your body or your pelvis, your center of mass. So the more that you are connected to your feet and the more that your feet are connected to your core, really the overall control the athlete will have over their body. And then the third way, final way that I'll go into, is controlling the actual mechanics of the foot. So the stronger the foot is through contracting the muscles, then the more it will translate to a neutral foot, a stronger arch. Strong arches create rotation into the hips and into the glutes. So there's a strong correlation between strong foot posture mechanically and strong pelvis total body posture. So those are 3 really powerful ways of why I like to access the foot without shoes.
So does that kind of help our athlete like run faster or like jump higher?
Yes, so 100%. So the running faster, jumping higher, one way that I will kind of reference this has to do with our digits, so your toes. And there's some research studies that show that the stronger the toes, or what's called toe flexion strength, the more you can push into the ground and against the ground when you're jumping up or sprinting forward, the faster the acceleration and the higher the vertical jump. So oftentimes in shoes, we don't really connect to our toes. We kind of forget that aspect of our foot. So taking the shoes off can help the athlete actually feel, I consider it like follow through. So I know you have Michael Jordan in the background, and the follow through of the basketball player, right? So they're shooting the hoop and they have to have this follow through, right? Same thing when we run and we jump, we want to have follow through with our foot, and you're using the entire foot all the way through the digits to optimize power output.
So in basketball, when we like shoot a basketball, it's kind of like a whip. Is that the same thing, like same thing you just mentioned, the follow through with the foot?
Yeah, so it's really kind of levers and mechanics and torque, right? You're trying to get as much torque out of the foot as you can. And in the foot and the ankle, The Achilles tendon is obviously really important. I'm sure a lot of the listeners are familiar with why you need to access the largest, strongest tendon in the human body, which is the Achilles. But then the other part that you're trying to take advantage of is it's called the lever of the foot. And that's the position of the foot when you do a calf raise. So if you do a calf raise and you look at the foot, that lever is really what catapults the Achilles power. So it's not just your foot as like a long extension. It is the foot shifting into this lever that is what propulses that energy forward. So that analogy of kind of like whipping of that aspect, yes, because there has to be a continuity of energy, right? A fluidity. It's actually fluid, the movements, and that is fascial.
Cool. So since you brought up like Achilles tendon, there's a lot of like coaches train like heel elevated like single leg squat or heel elevated like squat. How is it that different with like barefoot training? And which is more helpful for like training Achilles tendon stiffness?
Yeah, I think that really the best thing for the listeners to take away from any training modality is that it is the variability of the stimulus. So if you are going to do heels elevated, which is very trendy right now, to do that knees over toes, right? Very trendy right now. I get it. I appreciate it. But you don't want to only do then the squatting patterns heel elevated. You still want to be familiar with what it is to be plantigrade or like foot flat on the ground, right? Similarly to that, I then tell people, okay, you want to be able to do these athletic movements barefoot in minimal shoes and then in your basketball shoes, as an example, if we stay with that sport, right? So you are trying to transfer and create this varied stimulus to the athlete so that they are the most prepared from a neurological perspective to be able to stabilize and perceive the joints under force and load, not just I train one way all the time, and then they become vulnerable when they get out of that position.
So if we're gonna train barefoot or like what I just mentioned, the toes, should we put in like warm up or like end of the training session?
For sure in the beginning. I would definitely put it in the movement prep. And I often argue that the first 15 minutes of any training session, workout, right, game, whatever it is really the most important time that you're trying to turn on the nervous system. You're waking up the brain, you're doing various muscle activation techniques, you're bringing in sensory stimulation, then you're mobilizing, right? So in the beginning, it's really, really powerful. Now, having said that, at the end, the recovery side is obviously very important as well, and is another opportunity for the athlete to kind of reconnect to their body, spread and splay, and kind of reverse what shoes do to the feet. So really, I would end cap it, right? Just think of like, okay, I'm going to bring barefoot into the end caps of the session. I start and I end that way. That would be probably the most effective.
Cool. Because I train like track athlete, table tennis, soccer, basketball, all kinds of athlete. And some of them I use it at the beginning of like the movement prep or the warm up. Some of like maybe like table tennis, I use it like the end of it, but not really sure which is more helpful.
Yeah. So now you could do both.
That was cool. So I know you talk a lot about barefoot movement. So like, is there any like specific movement we should do on when we're barefoot?
Yes. So I like to start by releasing the feet. That could be on a golf ball, lacrosse ball. At Nabosa, we have a neuro ball that has little spikies on it to kind of wake up the nerves. But even if you used a golf ball, the point of releasing the feet is to activate the feet. There's research showing that it is a great activation tool, warms up the tissue, brings circulation to the foot, all of that very beneficial. So I like to start with that. And then I like to start to get into intrinsic foot activation. Short foot is my go-to exercise. That's really spreading and pushing the toes or the digits down into the ground. When your toes push down, the small muscles in the foot start to contract. However, I always do it in integration with the pelvic floor because that's how it works. So if I cue pushing the toes down, I want a lift of the pelvic floor or a contraction of the transverse abdominals, and then those connect to the diaphragm. So I would want this intentional toes down, core engaged exhalation of the breath. So that kind of stack or that activation is what I like to do. And then, of course, any sort of like single leg, I kind of like to introduce something single leg to warm up the proprioceptors and the mechanoceptors of the feet. So then that's kind of a gradual introduction. And then I just start to load from there.
Cool. So kind of like jump into the next topic about like, I know do a lot of like seminar on your YouTube, right? So you talk a lot about like pre-tension and how does it affect the landing mechanic. From that side, I think how does barefoot help when we are like landing?
Yeah, so that goes into understanding the sensation or the stimulus when our foot hits the ground, which is ground reaction forces. And ground reaction forces or impact forces are perceived by the feet and the nervous system as vibration. Okay, so that's an important part of this, is that the listeners understand, okay, foot striking ground, I feel and sense vibrations. These vibrations or impact forces is your body's energy, potential energy. And we will want to store that potential energy, and then you essentially release that as elastic energy. It's just the kinetic energy curve, right? Potential energy in, elastic energy out. That energy is the impact forces that are perceived as vibration. So now as a vibration comes into the body, you have to be able to absorb it or stop it, because if you get too much vibration into your body, your soft tissue, your bone, you can get stress fractures, plantar fasciitis, Achilles tendonitis. So a lot of these injuries that some of these athletes might experience. The way that we absorb the vibration is through stiffening our muscles to tension our fascia. So that's where this tension is coming in, right? It's a fascial response based off of a muscle contraction. And the muscle contraction that drives tension is isometrics. That's a really important concept to be able to connect that, is isometric contractions drive fascial tension. Now, this pre-tension response is essentially saying that impact and vibration is coming into the foot faster than you can actually consciously think about it. So you have to be engaging and stiffening the muscle and the fascia before your foot even strikes the ground. Okay, so it's pre-tension, pre-activation, anticipatory. These are all kind of similar ways to describe what's happening here. Okay, now what slows us down to the perception or the anticipation of the ground is oftentimes shoes, because shoes with the cushion absorbs the vibration and it skews the accuracy of what you actually feel. Okay, so to be faster at tensioning or this pre-tension response, you need to have an accurate understanding of what's coming in. So I like to get athletes barefoot on the surface. Let's say basketball. Basketball is a great example because they're on a court, right? So the athlete is on a wood floor that is suspended in a way to optimize the energy transfer of the sport, right? So they're very intelligently and expensive designed surfaces, right? So it's great to take advantage of that and have the athlete doing barefoot movements, starting to get into some ballistics barefoot to actually feel the ground and how the ground vibrates, the wood surface vibrates the court, so that they can start to create these pre-tension responses. Because as soon as they put on their shoes, it's going to start to take away some of that perception. I call it barefoot before shod, is barefoot activate movement prep. Then we're going to put on the shoes, knowing it's going to start to kind of slow everything down a little bit.
I asked this question is because I used to play basketball before, and now I'm like training track right now. I also train some track athletes, and nowadays everybody in the track world talks about like pre-tension, switching, hit the ground fast. Yeah, so I know it kind of like when our foot hit the ground, it's like isometric contraction, and we're gonna push off. It's not really like concentric and eccentric, maybe a little bit, but more of a isometric contraction thing. So that's kind of like why I asked the question. It's kind of like for the athletes or like for the coaches who train track athletes. And
yes,
yeah, and you answer the question like that's very helpful.
Can I just add on there for the listeners that may work with track athletes? Cool. Is Dr. Ben O'Neill and researchers in like sprinting mechanics and sprinting science really show that what makes a sprinter fast is their contact time. So the faster the runner, the shorter the contact time. And we get off of the ground by being sufficiently stiff when we strike the ground. Yes. So that's essentially what it's saying. And when it's really fascinating when you look at kind of the sprinting research behind Usain Bolt, and it's like, how is he so fast, right? Is essentially saying, well, it's not how quickly he swings his limb forward. It's not that, it's not stride. It is that he has a shorter contact time for every foot strike. So that is what's essentially making him faster. That I'm so glad that you mentioned that, because really sprinting is the best representation of this pre-tension response. Another one that I often reference, and you may not work with the sport, but is gymnastics. And gymnastics and the science of a gymnastics floor is that every time the gymnast is, let's say, doing back handsprings, they are essentially tensioning their body and storing more and more potential energy so that they can do the, triple back or something really, really, quite amazing. And what they show is they'll do EMG studies and show that the more elite the gymnast, the faster the pre-activation responses in their stabilization. So it's really a power mechanism, a speed mechanism, and a force power transfer. So any athlete that wants to be quick, faster, more powerful really needs to understand tension.
Yeah. So is that like, is there like, because for like strength training or like plyometric training, we're always going to be noticing the volume or the intensity. So for the barefoot training, is there anything like overtraining?
Well, what I want to emphasize on that is that people do think of the foot like your quads or your glutes, right? And I don't want people to think that in the sense of you shouldn't be training the foot to failure, or don't train the foot to feel the burn, right? And hit this, hypoxic or lactic acid threshold or anything like that. It doesn't happen there. Very similar to the pelvic floor or the transverse abdominals, they're postural muscles. So you don't want to hit this fatigue point. So that's where that would be the biggest thing that I hear that and see that within the strength and conditioning because they just think more is better.
Yeah,
But we don't want to do that.
It's more like activating the core.
Right. And then can you build, I would rather, instead of trying to hit, this is my 1 rep max on my foot intrinsics, this is how quickly I can activate my intrinsics, right? So what is the time to activation or the peak, right? So kind of like rapid isometric in the intrinsics, that's more transferable to function or athletic performance than this hypothetical 1 rep max on the foot.
Yeah. So it's rapid, like rapid isometric, and it's gonna connect to all the body, and then it's just gonna transfer faster, right?
Correct.
Cool. So that's kind of like barefoot training from performance side. How about like rehab side? Because I work with, not really work with, but there's like a few physical therapists who also watch this, and they're interested in athlete return to play. So if there's like an athlete or like let's say a normal, just ordinary people who like maybe tear their ACL, and is barefoot training or gonna help them go back to their normal life faster?
Yeah, so there's a lot of research showing that activating the nerves in the bottom of the feet will actually lead to faster ankle stabilization, foot awareness, plantar fasciitis kind of prevention because of foot strength. So I like to take all athletes, individuals who are going through a rehab into barefoot training, because a lot of where that injury occurred in the first place, whether it's plantar fasciitis, a stress fracture, ankle sprain, IT band, I don't know what the injury is, whatever it is correlated to a lack of perception of the foot and the speed and the timing of the foot itself, which is often associated with footwear, which is why I like to get people out of their shoes and just like feeling the feet, connecting to the feet, understand, the digit dexterity, spread the toes, feel the ground. Can you actually get your arch to contract? Like all of that is very basic foundational foot concepts that then lay the foundation to everything else that the physical therapist or the coach may be doing for that injury rehab.
I asked this because like I noticed that there's a lot of like therapists in the state, when they get athlete, they were on rehab, they're gonna do their rehab session, they do it on barefoot. But when it's in Taiwan, I don't really see there's a lot of like therapists doing their barefoot stuff. It's more on their shoes.
Yes. So I would encourage them to explore the world of barefoot and how powerful the foot is. Really, it's something that is not taught that much in physical therapy schools. So if the training isn't there, it has to be sought out on their own once they graduate and they've been practicing for a while, right? To then appreciate the complexity, but this, high priority, powerful structure that is the human foot. And when you start to see people who do it, and they see the response in their patients or their athletes, they are then all about the feet because they realize how powerful that they are.
Yeah.
And you can't access that level of strength in shoes. You just can't, because there's a barrier between them and the ground.
Yeah, couldn't agree more, because like there's like 2 years ago, I'm starting to train track, running 100-meter sprint, and do a lot of like plyo. And at some point, my heels hurt, like a lot. And every day I woke up, when my foot touched the ground, I was like, damn, it hurts. And it kind of like irritates me, so I don't know how to train anymore. But like after I kind of like train with like my foot, with barefoot, it just didn't happen anymore. So now I'm like run faster and jump higher. Squat easier.
Yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense, right? You were putting a lot of load through your structures, and perhaps it didn't have sufficient awareness, strength, like really rapid isometric, or possibly the extensibility of the connective tissue as well. So that's also important for the listeners to understand that, versus sometimes we rely on the shoe to do the work or the job, and then not realizing that we have to get the foundational structure strong as well.
Okay, cool. So next thing I want to talk about is like ankle mobility. We talk a lot about like foot. How about ankle? And I mean, foot is important, but yeah, how about ankle and the mobility we should work?
Ankle is very important. Many people have limited ankle mobility, and two of the biggest compensations for limited ankle mobility is going to be turning the feet out like a duck. So that would be someone who says, I can't squat with my feet parallel, I have to turn them out wide, or they actually walk like a duck. So every step that they take, their feet are turned out. The second one is to pronate, or to collapse into the feet. That is the second most common compensation for limited ankle mobility. Now, in the pronated, where they collapse down into their feet, as soon as we pronate, over pronate, we unlock and destabilize the foot. So that means that our foundation has just destabilized, and that is going to influence all the way into the pelvis. And the driver of the foot instability and now the hip instability is a lack of ankle mobility. So oftentimes people will just address the hip and not realize that it was the foot that was driving it, or in this case, the ankle. So that's where assessment is really important. The one where people turn out like a duck and maybe squat or walk that way or run, is it creates a lot of transfer stress into the big toe, into the inside of the ankle joint, into the medial knee. So both of those are very stressful compensation positions that will start to affect higher up, more so than just the foot itself.
So for those who the foot collapse, so what should we be doing with them?
So you really want to know what is the cause of the ankle mobility, limited ankle mobility, and it's not always soft tissue. So you might think, okay, they have limited ankle mobility, they have quote unquote tight calves, let me roll the calves, stretch the calves, and then my problem is solved. Unfortunately, that's not the case. There's other reasons for it. So what I teach actually in my trainings is to teach the professional to differentiate between soft tissue and bony reasons for limited ankle mobility. And then if it's soft tissue, is it the gastroc? Is it the soleus? Is it the complex? Is it hypertonicity, like a spasticity, which is different than just tight muscles? Or is it a structurally short Achilles tendon? So you could have something that is just structurally short, and you can stretch and roll and do everything you want, and you are never going to increase that ankle mobility. So it's just kind of something to understand. From the bony reasons, you either have spurs on the front of the ankle, or the talus, which is a bone of the ankle joint, can sometimes shift forward. So you get this blocking, or the bone gets in the way of the leg moving forward, and then you get a block. All of those are addressed slightly differently.
So is it the same with the foot like turning out like a duck?
So that's the compensation. So you want to be able to identify the compensation. And another common one could be someone who squats, and as soon as they start to squat, the heels pop up, right? That's a compensation. As soon as they squat, the feet turn out. As soon as they squat, the feet collapse in. When they squat, they drop their chest. Those are some of the biggest squatting compensations that if you see that, you got to go to the ankle. And then when you go to the ankle, you want to ask yourself, is it soft tissue or bony? whichever it is, then which is the reason. And you kind of systematically go through these to then get to the correct cause. So then you know how to fix it.
Cool. So, for like athletes or like for coaches out there who not really like doing barefoot training or who are started to learn what is barefoot training, do you have any like recommendation for them?
Well, I mean, I have a lot of content that is out, and I try to create these foundational concepts to build appreciation, right? So once you appreciate the complexity and the power of the foot, then you have this inherent curiosity to explore more. I have a lot of content on YouTube. We have courses that are online through EBFA Global that people can take to start to kind of explore it. Outside of that, to start to understand and play around with barefoot training would be getting your athletes barefoot, releasing the feet, and understanding short foot. I would say just even starting there is, okay, what is a short foot? I have many videos on YouTube about short foot, and they can just Google short foot and EBFA or short foot Dr. Emily, and then they'll see the videos, and then just start to play around with that and see how the athletes respond to it. If that's too complex, then even just whatever you do as your movement prep, just have their shoes off, and that's it, right? And then just start to see if the athletes move a little bit better, a little bit more connected. What's interesting is any research studies about barefoot training in athletes is there's always this disclaimer or this comment at the end of the research study that says, okay, after this 6-week study or 8-week study, a majority of the athletes wanted to continue the barefoot. They're like, even though the study's over, can I keep being barefoot? Because they actually notice the difference.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
So how about a last thing, okay? How about like flat foot? Does barefoot training gonna help them?
That is it depends answer because the other thing that I go into in my trainings, which not to make it very complicated, but it's just how complex the foot is there's different types of flat feet. So for the coaches and the physical therapists is when you say the words flat foot, that doesn't mean the same thing to every person, right? Now, the most common type of a flat foot that barefoot training can help build an arch in is one that when you sit and your feet are kind of in front of you and you see a nice, beautiful arch, and then they stand up and it kind of rotates and collapses in. That is this kind of flexible flat foot that is associated to oftentimes the post tib and the glute strength. There's another common one that is a pancake foot, is what I call it. And the pancake foot is flat, but it's actually not pronating. It's not rotating inward. So there's no rotational component to it. A pancake foot, you cannot change the arch height in a dramatic way. However, can you train and build small muscle strength in the foot? In a pancake foot, yes. Can you make a pancake foot faster? And can you make that foot connect to the core? Yes. So that's kind of where I would start with that.
Cool. Get it. So, I know you got a super busy schedule. So what keeps you like putting all those posts for like coaches like me or other coaches online? And what like keeps you for the passionate, like keep learning or keeping being top on the like profession?
Yeah, I mean, the feet are so powerful, and I have really found this approach to human movement and athletic performance that I want to share with really the world, because I travel and I teach and I do a lot of international stuff, so that you are able to carry that to your athletes. Where if I kept it to myself and only shared it with my patients or athletes that I work with, then I can't help that many people. So I have to spread it and use it and apply it. And really my favorite part is that when I share these concepts with, say, you or someone who's listening to your podcast, and then they apply it slightly different to what I would have thought of because of their background and their specialty, it has now just evolved to something even more powerful. So that's what I love as well. I don't know. I say that's my little personal mission, is to help people move better through feet. So you carry my message forward now.
Yeah. So for those who are interested in what we're talking about today, where can they reach out to you? And the future of like EBFA after the COVID, are you going to come back to Taiwan?
Yeah, so I'm on Instagram. My Instagram is Emily DPM. That's my personal Instagram. I post tons of education on there. And then for EBFA, the website is ebfaglobal.com. And that's where we have both in-person and online trainings, online recorded. So you would take them at your own pace. And then, yes, I do plan to return to Taiwan. I actually have several consistent hosts, and I actually want to reach out to them and say, okay, now that the world is opening up, are you ready? Let's do it again. So yeah, if it's not in 22, then for sure it would be in 23, because my beginning of 23, my schedule is getting quite booked already. But I would love to. I love Taiwan. The level of curiosity and intelligence there is very, very high, that I love to go there because people like really take what I teach and apply it. So yes.
Yeah, because there's like physical therapists asking this question. So I'm asking.
Okay. Okay. Well, Eric, you have to organize it then.
I'll try to do that. Okay.
Okay.
Appreciate it for the time.
Of course. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Of course.